Chapter 3. The Beginning of the Paywall. 1. As the next scene began to play, the excitement in the room began to evaporate. The first scenario, the first taste of this hell that had become their world, was not something most people would want to revisit. Kim Doksha glanced at the kids with a small frown on his face. Lee Gil-young only had to watch some of the horrors that had occurred, and Kim Doksha honestly thought that the boy had disassociated through the majority of the events in the subway, but his hands had still been clean by the end of that scenario. Not that it had lasted long, and the boy had seemed remarkably well adjusted, but it was the other kids he was more worried about. He knew that Shin Yu-sung carried a lot of guilt over what she had to do in the first main scenario, and Kim Doksha had no idea what Yumiya had to do to survive. At least Yumiya had her brother for comfort, so he didn't have to worry about her. She probably wouldn't want Kim Doksha to even attempt to comfort her in this first place anyway. Wordlessly, he placed a hand on Shin Yu-sung and Lee Gil-young's backs as a silent show of support, even just to feel like he was doing something. Both children relaxed into his touch and even began clinging to his waist. It was kind of cute, and Shin Yu-sung's shaky hands, as she desperately sought comfort, only made Kim Doksha more certain of what he planned to do in the fifth main scenario. There was no way he was killing this kid, even if Seoul had to burn. Constellations who like children are cooing at the adorable sight. It's a dokebi, someone exclaimed as the creature sprung into view. I don't know why that sentence popped into my head at that moment. The subway came to a halt, and the entire cabin grew dark. Doksha looks around in disbelief, trying not to believe this could be happening. There was no way. Subways stop all the time, after all. The opening lines of a very familiar story kept crossing my mind, but it doesn't make any sense. There's no way. Suddenly, Sangha opens her mouth. A dokebi? Doksha turns to look at her. Sorry? Realistically speaking, there's no way this could be true. It was completely impossible, but... Two small horns. A downy creature wearing a straw garment was floating mid-air. It was too peculiar to be called a fairy, too malicious to be called an angel, and too innocent-looking to be called a devil, so he called it a dokebi. Doksha watches in disbelief as red sparks crackle in the train and a creature exactly as described in TWSA appear in front of the passengers of the subway cabin. The frightened passengers murmur amongst themselves, but all Doksha can do is pay attention to the dokebi. At that moment, fiction and reality overlapped. This novel of yours, Yoo Jin-yuk began in a harsh voice, is that where your future knowledge comes from? Of course, the protagonist would pick up on it instantly. There was no way he should lie, Yoo Jin-yuk's lie detection skill aside, when everything would be revealed shortly anyway. Yes. The man's eyes narrowed as he thought something to himself, but he just turned back to the screen wordlessly. For some reason, Kim Doksha had the odd feeling that Yoo Jin-yuk felt satisfied with something, almost as if he had finally pieced together a part of a strange puzzle. Weird. Why would that be? Doksha, see, since the novel is called 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, is it some kind of survival guide for the apocalypse? Maybe if more people knew, there wouldn't have been as many victims? Lee Hyun-sung asked, his expression brightening slightly. Kim Doksha hated to be the bearer of bad news, but everyone was probably getting their hopes up a bit too much. Han Se-young snorted. Even if that thing was a survival guide, I don't think it would have changed anything when it was so boring, but no one but this weirdo read past chapter 100. Kim Doksha smiled sadly at him, choosing to ignore Han Se-young's statement. Yes and no. There were parts that had genuinely helpful advice, but most of it was about something else. Lee Hyun-sung wilted. I see. Jung Hui-won just patted his shoulder in consolation while shooting Kim Doksha a weak smile. The dokebi tries to speak, but everything it says comes out in a garbled mess, to the confusion of everyone in the train cabin. No one knew what was going on. No one except me. It was the dokebi that appeared in the opening paragraph of TWSA. This creature heralded the tragedy that carried on for thousands of chapters throughout 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. That very same dokebi was right now in front of me. Suddenly, Sanga's voice cuts through Doksha's disbelief. I think it's speaking Spanish? Should I try talking to it? You don't even know what that thing is, Doksha replies quickly in a whisper, trying to avoid drawing the Dokebi's attention. Are you going to ask it to lend you money? Well, no, but... Testing! Can everyone hear me? Gosh, the language patch was malfunctioning for a bit. Can everyone hear me now? The Dokebi calls, only to be cut off by the passengers who just want the train to get moving again. An audition means nothing to a Dokebi, who mutters about getting more customers if the paywall goes up at 7 p.m. As the Dokebi tries to get everyone's attention, the crowd of passengers begins shouting. I am certain. I know exactly how the story goes. The constellation's secretive plotter is watching carefully. Ah, secretive plotter. It made sense that a constellation like that, who always praised him for his misdirections and subtle manipulations, would be cataloging everything he saw here. Honestly, with how supportive the constellation had been so far, it almost made Kim Doksha feel bad about how he had first reacted when his name appeared on the sponsor selection. Almost. A constellation was still a constellation, after all. Yusanga nervously fiddled with her fingers as she watched, frowning. It feels like it all happened so long ago, but seeing it again like this... Yeah, I understand, Lee Hyun-sung muttered. I can't say I'm proud of anything that happened that day. Then, in a show of uncharacteristic wisdom from a child, Lee Gil-yeon looked over in their direction. Just be proud that we survived, Hyun-sung-hyun. We can't change it now. Doksha knows he has to stop people from antagonizing it, and he tells Sangha not to move. Furious, the Dokebi yells at everyone to be quiet as it explodes the head of the man asking about his audition. Blood splatters over the surrounding passengers and leaves crimson stains on the metal floor of the subway cabin, causing a mass panic. We're not filming a movie. This isn't a dream or a novel, and it certainly isn't the reality you're all familiar with. Do you understand? More and more bodies hit the floor as the Dokebi continues to yell, killing the noisy humans as easily as swatting a fly. I hated to admit it, but this was real. My doubt and disbelief slowly faded away as I watched the floor quickly become painted in blood. Shin Yun-sung flinched violently at the blood splattering everywhere and curled closer to Kim Doksha for comfort. She trembled and shook, even after Kim Doksha hesitantly wound an arm around her waist in a half-hug. How'd you see? She muttered tearfully, and Kim Doksha tried to whisper reassurances to her. On his other side, Lee Gil-yeon frowned a bit, but reached over and patted her head a few times anyway. I'll share Hyung with you for a bit, he said with a huff. Of course they could share, but Kim Doksha wasn't sure why they would go to him for comfort instead of someone like Yusanga. It's not like he was great with kids in the first place or anything. Constellations who like bloodshed are ecstatic. The kids, even Yumiya, flinched. Oh, just shut up, would you? The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is laughing at the display. The constellation Demon-like Judge of Fire is glaring at constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon. Thanks, Ariel. All of you have had quite a cushy life until now, haven't you? The Dokebi cackles. You're able to breathe, eat, excrete, and reproduce without paying the costs. You've all been enjoying privileged lives, but it's all over now. Nothing is free in life, isn't that right? Everyone in the cabin is terrified, but a middle-aged man steps forward and offers the Dokebi some money. Doksha and Sangha recognize him as Han Mun-go, the manager of the finance team at their workplace. The Dokebi, however, is unimpressed despite how much money he offers. Without wasting a beat, the stack of won is burned to ashes. Ha! There's no time for chit-chat. Your debt is piling up as we speak. The Dokebi sighs. I won't bother explaining it to you. It'll be faster for you to try and earn the money yourselves. The Dokebi's horns grow, and an announcement pops up declaring that channel number B1-7623 has opened and that the constellations are now making an entrance. System windows appear in front of everyone in the train that proclaim that the main scenario has arrived. Doksha looks down at the message of the scenario requirements with hardened eyes. It tells him to prove his value by killing one or more living organisms within 30 minutes. If he succeeds, he will be rewarded with 300 coins. If he fails, the penalty will be paid with his life. The Dokebi cackles and wishes everyone good luck before grinning darkly. I expect to see an interesting story. With that, the Dokebi vanishes, leaving all the passengers to their despair. To think that the requirements seemed harsh at the beginning, considering how things had only devolved from there. Glancing over to his side, Kim Doksha noticed that Yoo Jin-yuk was looking right back at him. For a moment, his heart skipped a beat. God, that was terrifying to see out of nowhere. What? Give a man some warning, damn it. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire is eagerly watching for signs of companionship between incarnations Yoo Jin-yuk and Kim Doksha. Thankfully, Yoo Jin-yuk ignored Uriel's indirect message like a professional and continued the conversation without once acknowledging it. It was probably for the best, considering that Kim Doksha couldn't even be certain what she meant by companionship. It's not like Yoo Jin-yuk even considered him a companion in the first place anyway. I only saw some of the chaos of your cabin through the window, Yoo Jin-yuk admitted. I'm curious to see what actually happened. Kim Doksha nodded while glancing away. I understand. Well, he'd probably find himself disappointed by how Kim Doksha had handled things. But it was too late for regrets now. With any luck, Yoo Jin-yuk would hopefully at least understand why he did what he did. Lee Gil-young hugged him tighter around the waist, drawing his attention away from the protagonist. Yun, are you doing okay? I'm fine, Kim Doksha replied, patting the boy's head instinctively. It'll just get rougher from here, so let me know if you need anything. Okay. As for everyone else, Yu Sanga and Lee Hyun-sung still seemed to be doing okay, but there was no telling how long that would last. Still, it would be better to get it over with sooner rather than later. Without wasting any more time, Kim Doksha looked back up at the screen as the next portion began to play.